Good evening, Shalom, and welcome to this episode here of The Watchdog. I am your host, C.Jay Cox, coming at you from my cat room in here, where I keep cats and also my recording equipment. Keep the cats against their will, actually. Fun little fact. And here's another fun fact. You do, too, if you own cats. So that, yeah, I don't know, pets are weird. Definitely not saying you shouldn't own pets, just something I thought about earlier today. It's like awesome slavery if you think about it, because, you know, pets, if they were in the wild, would be basically dying at the age of 6 of ridiculous diseases like, you know, cat leukemia or something like that, or being mauled by a bear or something like that. And yet at the same time, they're basically property. It's just something I thought was kind of funny. Nonetheless, all jokes aside, welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. Let's get serious. We do have some pretty interesting news for you. Pretty disheartening news for you in some cases. Really just kind of want to get right into some of it, but before we do, actually, there's a few things I want to just briefly say. So, this is interesting. Fox News channel tops cable. Sean Hannity leads the pack. Tucker Carlson edges Rachel Maddow. This is coming from Deadline.com by Lisa DeMorris. We're not actually going to read the whole article, but according to this website, it says Fox News and numerous other websites have corroborated this as well. Fox News has finished April as the number one basic cable network for the 34th consecutive month in total day. The month the DOJ finally released Special Counsel Robert Mueller's nearly 2-year probe into the Russian election interference and any Trump administration role. FNC also celebrated its 208th consecutive month as the most watched cable news network in total day and prime time. MSNBC was apparently number 2. CNN says down here was more competitive in total day than in prime time. In total day, it ranked number 9, actually, believe it or not, averaging 445,000 viewers, behind the other 2 news nets as well as Investigation Discovery, HGTV, Nickelodeon, TNT, ESPN, and USA Network. In prime time, CNN fell to number 15, also falling behind ESPN, History, TBS, Hallmark Channel, and etc. So just interesting news. You know, nothing that is particularly important, I guess. I think it is interesting mainly because Fox News is actually the one that has not been so gung-ho about the Russia probe, honestly. And I think that's noteworthy because I don't think a lot of Americans care about the Russia probe. Now, it is interesting, though, that it's actually MSNBC and not CNN or some other left-wing news organization that takes over the number 2 spot. Namely because MSNBC is actually very open about the fact that they are a left-wing news organization, much like the same way that Fox is very open that they're conservative, right? Which I think it's noteworthy because it means that there's some level of honesty that is still respected by both sides of the political aisle as far as the American populace is concerned and as far as the way that we like to consume our news. Now, I don't like either Fox or MSNBC, to be perfectly honest with you. I think they're both terrible, actually. I do really like Tucker Carlson, but I think Tucker Carlson is like the one redeeming factor on Fox News. I'm not a big fan of Hannity. I was even less of a fan of, what's that guy? Hannity? No, not Hannity. I just said Hannity. O'Reilly. That's his name. And you know, Greg Gutfeld is not somebody I've been particularly interested in, you know, so. Then there's even people worse than that. I actually do have to say Andrew Napolitano, too, is another one I like. So Tucker Carlson and Andrew Napolitano are like the lone bright spots for Fox News. But other than that, I'm just not a fan of Fox News, right? As far as MSNBC is concerned, it's the exact same thing. They're both partisan. They both want to, you know, twist everything in their particular way, which, of course, everybody is in their own particular way, you know, biased, right? I don't like partisan because partisan means you're fitting a party line versus your own conviction. If you're biased towards your own conviction, that's a completely different aspect, in my opinion, than being, or completely different, you know, thing than being partisan and following a political party, basically a political gang, right? But they are honest, is the point, right? And they are the ones who say, yeah, we are conservative. Tucker Carlson is never going to be mistaken for a Democrat, right? Likewise, Rachel Maddow is never going to be mistaken for a Republican. There's absolutely no way that Chris Matthews is going to the RNC or CPAC, right? So, and I think that's good, because it does mean that there is some level of respect, like I said, for decency and for, honesty in one's political agenda and one's political motives on the part of the American people and the American news consumer. And I like that. That's a cool thing, I think. CNN being as low as it is a very good example of that, because CNN is easily the most dishonest organization in all of news, and they claim to be unbiased, which is completely ridiculous. They're incredibly biased. Everybody on the CNN panel is a liberal, like literally almost everybody. I mean, you have, Brian Stelter, you have, I don't remember all their names because I don't really like them. Anderson Cooper, Don Lemon, right? Wolf Blitzer. There you go. Just got the big four. Then, there's others, but you get the point, right? They're leftists. They're obviously leftists. They're liberals, which is okay. Obviously you have a right to be a liberal and be in news, but obviously the American people, according to this article, but according to their like of MSNBC over CNN, by a lot, the American people like you to be honest about those biases. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I wanted to kind of note that. There was another thing here that I wanted to note that is, we're not going to get into too terribly deeply, but that I do find to be very important. And that is, hang on, let me get rid of some of this stupid stuff here. So, as it turns out, there is a man by the name of Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California. He says Vice President Pence is inciting violence in Venezuela. We are going to be getting into the whole Venezuela thing, both in this article and in another one. However, there is something I found to be very interesting in what Ro Khanna said. Okay, so Ro Khanna, Representative Ro Khanna, by the way, this is from Washington Examiner. Okay. The writer of this article is, just a moment, Julio Rosas. My apologies if I did not say that correctly. Democratic congressman accuses VP Pence of inciting violence in Venezuela. Representative Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California, accused Vice President Mike Pence of inciting violence by speaking on the devolving situation in Venezuela. Tuesday has seen an escalation in violence against pro-Nicolas Maduro regime forces as Juan Guaido, the recognized acting president of Venezuela, calls for his supporters to take the country back. Khanna told MSNBC that Congress has called for restraint on both sides so there are no more casualties, and specifically called out Pence. Quote, "This is why some of us in Congress have been urging restraint. We condemn Maduro's regime. It's been a failed regime," Khanna said. And listen to this, okay? "But we have been saying the vice president shouldn't be interfering and inciting violence with Guaido. I don't know how you say that, I'm sorry. What we should be doing," listen to this, "what we should be doing is deferring to the Pope to have a negotiated settlement, or Uruguay or Mexico. It looks like the United States is inching into another bloody conflict, and this is not going to be easy. Venezuela is one of the most armed nations in the world, 1.6 million militias. The military appears to be divided between Guaido and Maduro." Now, few things to note here. First and foremost, I just want to say, if anybody in the United States government is currently considering running guns to Venezuela, or, I mean, I want to just say something really quick. I understand the moral argument. Oh, they're eating dogs and stuff like that, and that's horrible. Yes, correct. Horrible. Okay? Hate it. Independently, if you would like to go funnel money and guns to, the Venezuelan militias, I actually don't really have a problem with that. I mean, I know that probably sounds weird to some people, saying, oh, so you're okay with the private sector doing it, but not the government. But quite frankly, yeah. Because then at least you chose to. At least if a problem is caused down in Venezuela, such as, a new ISIS or something like that, like, I don't know, the invasion of Iraq caused. If something like that were to happen, it's 100% on you. It's not on me as a taxpayer, right? It's not on the government as a whole. It's on you. And whichever group you decided to fund, and whichever group of people decided to fund said group, right? So I don't really mind necessarily that idea. I mean, who cares? But I do mind the idea of the United States putting its foot where it doesn't need to be, putting its nose where it doesn't need to be, and saying, oh, hey, especially when there's oil involved, because there's always, for some strange reason, some natural resource that's involved in these. I mean, it's weird, okay? I'm not saying for a fact that we always have some ulterior motive, but I am saying it is very strange that Iraq and Afghanistan and Venezuela all happen to be oil rich. Syria happens to be, oil rich. At least I believe, right? Syria is oil rich. I know for a fact the other three are. I guess I'm not 100% sure about Syria. Venezuela, obviously, like I said. Vietnam is rich in rubber, right? I mean, it's peculiar. That's all I'm saying. And of course, Afghanistan has tons of heroin, and now all of a sudden there's a big heroin epidemic, so that's also peculiar. Especially when you have people in the DEA who call out people in the CIA saying, we can't stop the drugs if you're running the drugs. Look up that video. I'm not even kidding. It's a straight up video. Nonetheless, right? So I don't like the idea of us putting our nose in other people's business, because it always ends up having some kind of blowback. We funded the Mujahideen. Al-Qaeda got, it was formed as a result. We funded the rebels in Syria. ISIS is formed as a result. We funded the rebels against Gaddafi, and Libya is pretty much a hellhole, is what the result is, right? There's no reason for us to get involved in these conflicts. Okay, they are conflicts between the people and their own governments. Now, there's no reason we should get involved on either end, is where I'm at with this, right? We shouldn't be supporting these evil governments, but we also should not be going out of our way to topple them either. Okay, if it happens naturally, then so be it. And we can be allies with them afterwards, right? We don't have to, these people are terrorists and these people are not terrorists. We can, okay, you're now the recognized government of Venezuela, then we can do business with you, right? If there happens to be a reason for us to do so, from a national security perspective, that obviously makes sense. I have heard the argument made by Ben Shapiro in particular that it is within our the aims of our national security to ensure a stable government in Venezuela, so as to not have a mass exodus of Venezuelans into this country and a larger problem with our border and the illegal immigration issue. And I can see that argument. I mean, it's not the worst argument I've ever heard, to be honest with you. I do find it kind of lackluster in the sense of that it seems to me like a much better argument would be to just fix our problem at the border, right? Instead of going into other countries and fixing other countries, we could fix our border, which is in our country, right? Which we could easily do, by the way. We don't need a wall. We don't need, even ICE for that matter. We could abolish ICE. We could just have the military and National Guard watch the border rather than, invading places like Venezuela or Iraq or etc., right? So there's easier fixes to this, but I do understand the rationale of the argument. I think it's overly hawkish. I think there's no reason for us to be in Venezuela. And quite frankly, you can't shoot people, and you can't help people by shooting them, is what I'm saying, right? So when you say, oh, we need to attack Iraq because Saddam Hussein is an evil dictator, all right, well, Saddam Hussein is not the 700,000 plus Iraqi civilians who end up dying as a result of that war, okay? He's one dude. And if the people of Iraq decide that they are going to rise up against him, that's obviously a different matter. But when we go in there and start, pulling the strings, start creating coups, start toppling governments, things like that, right? Then it's on us when the 700,000 die. Then it's on us when ISIS comes out and decides that they're going to take control over that area and Syria as well. Then it's on us when Al-Qaeda, gets control of planes and takes down the Twin Towers or assassinates political figures or bombs embassies, right? And it will be on us if a Venezuelan terrorist organization rises as a result of our meddling. Now, we don't have to meddle, right? We can stop the meddling. But at the current rate, I think that is where we're at now. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, and the thing that I was pointing to in this article, notice what Representative Khanna says, okay? He says the vice president shouldn't be interfering. What we should be doing is deferring to the Pope to have a negotiated settlement, or Uruguay or Mexico, which he says almost kind of as an afterthought, right? Question, why? Why is the Pope somebody who we defer to for political crisis? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, if you're going to say, well, it's because they're a Catholic nation, okay, well, they're a Catholic nation independent of the Catholic Church. So they should not have to go out to any outside figure to try and, create peace here. They should be making peace amongst themselves. They should have a uniting figure who rises out from amongst themselves, right? If a war happens to, happen as, to get that, that's unfortunate. It's not even, unfortunate. It's actually horrible. But sometimes it is necessary, unfortunately, right? I remind you, 2 revolutions have been fought in the United States of America, a failed one and a successful one. The successful one established our nation, and the failed one kept us preserved when we defeated the Confederate States of America, right? So, and there's been numerous other revolutions, actually, just for the record, that, we don't really consider, like pretty much every single Native American uprising, Nat Turner's rebellion, right? Things like Bloody Kansas, the Texas rebellion, although that was really towards the Mexicans, it wasn't towards us. But, nonetheless, right? Sometimes these things are necessary in order to achieve basically the quashing of evil, right? But when you're going out of your way to say, and the thing is, too, is I find it interesting that it's the Pope, right? It's always got to be the Pope. When it's Shimon Peres saying we need United Nations of religions, it's the Pope. When it's the World Council of Churches saying that, we're going to have a mass ecumenical meeting, they're meeting with the Pope. And when it's North Korea, and South Korea, trying to make peace, then the Pope has got to get involved. And he wants to get involved in Palestine and Israel as well. And it's always the Pope. It's always got to be the Pope somehow. Why do we respect the opinion of the Pope? I'm serious. He can't even control his own organization. Okay? He can't even manage to get rid of people who are touching children, for example, right? He has come out and said that there was sexual abuse of nuns. Well, have you done anything to stop that? Have you done anything to counter that? No. Right? Nothing at all. You can go on, right, with the different things that popes have not been able to control, or sometimes even actively endorsed, right? Like the Chinese government and their crackdown on Christians, Muslims, and Falun Gong and other religious figures, right? That's something that this pope, right now, currently is endorsed. He's not turned a blind eye to it or failed to do anything about it. He's endorsed, okay? Let's not forget that the pope before him was a member of Hitler Youth. Let's not forget that this pope currently is a communist. And not a communist according to what I'm saying, by the way. It's not like one of those things where you say, oh, Paulette Jordan is a communist, even though she is, right? She just doesn't admit it kind of thing. No, he is like Bernie Sanders. He's out, no, yeah. Marxism. It's the way to go. What of it? Obviously, you can explain the what of it, but the point is that is his opinion, okay? And he also, as I point out all the time, happens to believe he's the vicar of Christ, which means that he is in place of God, which is completely insane, right? And this is the person who we want to trust with all of our different peace conflicts. I would much rather Vice President Mike Pence be the one to get involved than Pope Francis. Now, I would much rather that neither of them get involved, like I pointed out in point number 1. However, if it's going to be anybody, I definitely do not want it to be Pope Francis. I definitely do not want it to be an organization that has slaughtered people who disagree with it, like the Inquisitions, for example, or the murder of the Cathars, for example, right? Or the Crusades, for example, or numerous other examples, okay? I definitely don't want it to be an organization that turns a blind eye to sexual abuse of children, right? And sexual abuse of teenagers as well, and sexual abuse of adults as well, and sexual abuse of even its highest-ranking members, apparently, even people who are supposed to dedicate their life to the church, apparently, like nuns, right? Nobody's safe from it. I definitely don't want it in the hands of an organization that has been led by a member of Hitler Youth within my lifetime. I'm 20 years old, for crying out loud, okay? I definitely don't want that organization to be in control of the peace talks. But apparently Representative Ro Khanna from California would like the Grand Blasphemous to have control over this situation. Beats me, okay? I don't know. I think it's completely insane. I think that trusting somebody who tries to call himself God is completely insane, unless he's got some very, 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 very good evidence. And by very, very, very good evidence, I mean a doctrine that is perfect, okay? Which I happen to own a Holy Bible, so there's something that I can compare that to, just for the record. Quite a bit of miracles, specifically the miracles associated with Jesus. Sure, there's some other things. definitely could not be the leader of the Catholic Church, right? That would just be, right off the bat, that would automatically disqualify you, because who was it that killed Jesus? It was the Pharisees, right? But anyways, why is it that Democrats, Republicans both, seem to think that this is a good idea? By the way, this is not just what I said, right? Just go ahead and listen for yourself.
Talking about, and some of the images, Congressman, I don't know if you can see what we're playing here on MSNBC, but I'd like you to reflect on what you're seeing and what the U.S. government's role should be going forward now, given this.
Well, this is why some of us in Congress have been urging restraint. We condemn Maduro's regime. It's been a failed regime, but we have been saying that the vice president shouldn't be interfering and inciting violence with Guaido. What we should be doing is deferring to the Pope to have a negotiated settlement, or Uruguay or Mexico. And it looks like the United States is inching into yet another bloody conflict, and this is not going to be easy. Venezuela is one of the most armed nations in the world, 1.6 million militias. The military appears divided between Guaido and Maduro. And the question is this really the United States' role to get involved in yet another war overseas?
Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for joining us on that. Ana, I want to go back to you, Ana Vanessa Herrero.
So notice how Uruguay and Mexico are they're just basically afterthoughts. Right? We should be deferring to the Pope for a negotiated settlement, or possibly maybe Mexico and Uruguay, right? Which why we would trust any of those two governments over the United States government is beyond me. Once again, I don't think we should be getting involved. However, I'm just saying that, the idea that somehow the Mexican government, which practically doesn't even exist, and the Pope, who is completely out of his mind, should be the ones to control this settlement is completely ridiculous. Now, the Venezuelan people should be the ones in control of their government, should be the ones in control of their destiny in this situation, right? And, of course, the Most High, right? That is the only other person who's going to be involved in this situation, who should be involved in this situation, in my opinion. Unless, of course, obviously, it's all done by his will, so I guess if somebody else is involved, then so be his will. But nonetheless, I don't see any reason for anyone to be getting involved, but I definitely do not like the fact that they want the Pope involved. And by the way, I would like to point something out. Let's go ahead and look up Ro Khanna real quick. Okay? I want to show you guys something. It's going to take a while. Sorry, the internet here is being slow. Ro Khanna is lying to the American people. Oh, Barr is lying to the American people, he says. No, that's not what it is. Just one moment. All right. Ro Khanna represents California's 17th district. Right? California's 17th district. Now, where might that be? San Francisco Bay Area? Santa Clara? Right? Is this sounding familiar to you guys yet? Silicon Valley. This is Silicon Valley. Right? The corporate headquarters of Apple Inc., Intel, Yahoo, eBay. Right? This is the place he represents, and he's actively going out of his way to say we should start deferring to the Pope in these sorts of political situations. Now, is that conspiratorial? I don't know. I guess that's up for you to decide. I don't think I have enough evidence to suggest one way or the other. But it's certainly noteworthy. It is certainly noteworthy. There was an article published recently. Let's see if I can look it up here. The Politics of Silicon Valley. Totally spelled that incorrectly. Ro Khanna on the Politics of Silicon Valley. Yep. This is a very interesting article that we're not actually going to read here today because we have to get into some other stuff. But I would advise you guys to read it. It is from Wired.com, written by Stephen Johnson, Ro Khanna on the Politics of Silicon Valley. Okay. It is very interesting. to say the least. Okay, it will tell you a lot about why I think there might possibly be something up with the fact that Ro Khanna is somebody who wants to defer political power and international power to the Pope, right? And the area he happens to represent and the views he happens to have. It's odd to me. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Nonetheless, we do have other things to talk about. Pompeo says the U.S. is prepared to take military action in Venezuela. I kind of already addressed this, but nonetheless, this is the New York Post, Jaren Steinbuch writing. Says, Pompeo says the U.S. prepared to take military action in Venezuela. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Wednesday that the U.S. was prepared to take military action and to stem the turmoil in Venezuela. And he was scheduled to speak with his Russian counterpart to discuss the Kremlin's role in the crisis. Quote, the president has been crystal clear and incredibly consistent. Military action is possible if that's what's required. That's what the United States will do, end quote, Pompeo said in an interview with Fox Business Network. Quote, we are trying to do everything we can to avoid violence. We'd prefer peaceful transition of government there where President Nicolas Maduro leaves and a new election is held, end quote, he said. The top U.S. diplomat added that he expects lots of people, quote, lots of people taking to the streets to defend their democracy, end quote. On Tuesday, President Trump threatened a full and complete embargo and sanctions against Cuba if the military did not immediately stop operations in Venezuela to shore up Maduro's regime. In addition to actions already taken by Team Trump to stop Cuba's support, quote, there are more that we will continue to work on, end quote, Pompeo said, adding that, quote, we'll do the same for the Russians. And then there's another interesting quote here. It says, quote, as President Trump said, they got to go and the Russians need to have the cost for that race. Once again, quote, as President Trump said, they got to go and the Russians need to have the cost for that race, he said. We are focused on making sure that we are focused on making sure that we do what we can to take this malign activity, which is undermining Juan Guaido, who is the duly elected leader of Venezuela. Sorry, I can barely read right now. I don't know why. And take these supports out from underneath Maduro so that he will depart the country, end quote. National Security Advisor John Bolton said in interviews with Certainly Not News and Fox News Wednesday that Pompeo planned to speak with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Bolton would not elaborate on what the U.S. knew about the Russian involvement affecting Maduro's plans, but he made clear that the Kremlin's interference was unwelcome. Quote, this is our hemisphere, end quote. He told reporters outside the White House, quote, it's not where the Russians ought to be interfering. This is a mistake on their part. It's not going to lead to the improvement of relations, end quote. Meanwhile, Venezuela braced for protest Wednesday after the embattled Maduro and Guaido appealed to their supporters to take to the streets a day after violent clashes left scores injured. Today we continue, Guaido, who leads the opposition-controlled National Assembly, wrote on Twitter early Wednesday, quote, we will keep going with more strength than ever, Venezuela. So, reiteration of what I already just said. We should not be getting involved. Now, there is, I do think, an argument to be made if the Russians do get involved, that we might need to. Now, and that would be very unfortunate. Now, I happen to think that Vladimir Putin is smarter than this, and that he can be talked out of it. I have that kind of faith. I don't know why. It's just my view that Vladimir Putin, I don't think he's a good person necessarily, though I think his regime is certainly, it's overblown. He definitely does some evil things. For example, I think assassinating journalists is not okay under any circumstances, right? Considering the fact that he is the second elected leader of the country in its entire history, I'm not quite as critical, shall we say, of Putin. Though he's definitely still a dictator. I do want to point that out. I think he's comparable to like Gaddafi in that sense, where it's like, all right, well, I can live with this dictator. I do, however, think he's intelligent, and I do think that he is interested in preserving Russia and Russian influence. And quite frankly, we have a mutually assured destruction kind of situation going on here, and have really since the 1950s. And I don't think it is wise for Putin to challenge that. I think that we currently have a president, and hopefully we will continue to have presidents who are willing to not let that kind of thing fly. Now, the idea of peace through strength is actually quite a good idea, right? The idea that we are so powerful that you will not take us down, you will be destroyed. If you destroy us, then so be it, you're destroyed as well. It's a very good national defense strategy. I don't think, like I said, that it'll have to come to anything. Now, I definitely don't think it'll come to blows between Russia and the United States. It's just my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully, I am right? Because we don't want blows between Russia and the United States. But I think Putin could be, if he does have military action in that area, I think he could be talked out of it, especially if there is legitimate threat from the United States, which I do think there is. I'm not entirely sure if the reports of us considering military action in Venezuela are accurate or not. However, there is definitely a legitimate threat to any Russians who are in the area and any Maduro forces who are in the area from our government. That much is clear. Pompeo, of course, has said that military action is something that we will consider, which I don't, like I said, I don't like that. Now, I will say this is slightly different than Iraq in the sense of that this is our hemisphere. And it is, like I said, there are arguments to be made for our national security sake. If there's Russians here, then we kind of, our hand's been forced. We have to get involved. If this is something that, is going to cause mass migrations, then it's certainly something we should note. Though I don't think it justifies a military invasion or a coup or anything like that. I think we should just worry about our own border. But hopefully none of it comes to any of that, right? We do have quite a horrible situation in Venezuela, obviously. There's I think like 90% of the population is under the poverty line now. I mean, there's the thing about them eating dogs. It's true. You're right. They are literally eating dogs. They've lost something like 40 pounds, 30 pounds on what they call the Maduro diet, right? They've got like 400 or something like that percent inflation. It might even be higher than that, actually. I think the last time Matt, for those of you guys who know Matt Hasselbar, right? I think he told me it was like 1,000% or something along those lines. I'm not 100% sure. But it's horrible, is the point, right? And Maduro is fat, right? He's fat. He's a fat slob banqueting with his cronies while his people starve, right? This disgusting dog meat. Let me be perfectly clear. Maduro is just a horrible human, okay? He's a terrible person. He rigged the elections. He's starving his people. He's now running them over with tanks and shooting at them, right? Which they, of course, can't do anything about because all the weapons have been taken by people like Hugo Chavez, who's another dog, though he's not quite as evil as Maduro. At least I don't think so. Didn't display quite as much evil as Maduro, let's put it that way. That all being said, though, that doesn't justify us going in and shooting at people, especially when you consider the fact that the people that are going to be punished by this is the thing that you always need to note when it comes to war, okay? The populace is the main benefactor, or not the main benefactor, the main recipient of the violence, right? That's always been the case. There's always been more civilian death than there has been military death, universally in almost every war, okay? What the decision of generals and politicians needs to be is this conflict worth the slaughter of innocent people? Because the slaughter of innocent people in war is inevitable. It will happen. Guaranteed. Okay? There's no avoiding it. There's literally no avoiding it. If you want to fight a conflict, now you can either fight it correctly and then you won't avoid it, like World War II, or you can fight it incorrectly and you still do not avoid it, like Vietnam and Iraq, right? So you need to ask yourself, is the problem I'm currently having worth the slaughter of innocent lives? Sometimes it is. That's a tough thing to admit, but sometimes it actually is, right? Sometimes when you have people bombing you, for example, Japan and Pearl Harbor, right, trying to encroach on your national sovereignty, sometimes the violence becomes justified, right? When you have a regime like the Nazis that is going around and, just basically causing a general ruckus right next door to you, in the case of Britain declaring war on Nazi Germany, that's justified, right? These are justified instances of violence. I'm being serious. They are, right? These are situations where honestly, it's like, okay, there's not much we can do. I'm sorry, German people, but at the same time, it's us or you at this point, right? But this is not one of those situations, okay? Especially if your, morale behind it is, oh, we're going to help these people. Really? You're going to help them by bombing them? Because we were going to help the Iraqi people too, and we bombed the hell out of them and led to the rise of ISIS. And 700,000 of them are dead now. And their government is still not functioning properly. Same thing with Afghanistan. Same thing with Vietnam. The Vietnamese people despise us, right? Because we went in to help. And people say, oh, you heard Ben Shapiro actually the other week. He made the claim, and by the way, I like Ben Shapiro. I'm just saying I think he's wrong on this. He made the claim that, American expansionism, or not expansionism, but American, I don't know, whatever you would call that. I guess Wilsonianism is the best way to put it, right? Because Woodrow Wilson established this whole idea, right? American Wilsonianism has worked numerous times, he said. He said that it would have worked in Vietnam, which is, I think he's probably just high if he thinks it would have worked in Vietnam, considering the fact that we were in Vietnam starting in the 1950s. We left in 1973. That is like almost 20 years, I think. It might have been actually about 20 years. Might have been like 18. But 60,000 of our boys died in that situation. Why? For nothing. And this man thinks that if we stayed longer, it would have been successful. No. He says that it was successful preserving democracy in South Korea. Yeah, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. South Korea has been a brutal dictatorship for most of its existence. It just so happens that North Korea has been a slightly worse dictatorship. Excuse me. I emphasize the word slightly, by the way, because South Korea has gone out of its way to massacre political opponents, specifically the communists, right? They rig elections. They have control over the economy. All the other kind of dictatorial stuff. So, that's hilarious. Afghanistan, that's hilarious, right? Iraq, that's hilarious. Where has our interventionism ever actually preserved democracy? You even want to use the example of Germany, but Germany is now the head of a globalist organization in the European Union, or at least the figurehead, right? That is dragging Europe and most of Western civilization down by its hair into the gutters of history. So sure, I guess we preserved democracy in Germany for like 50 years. Now, what we should have done is we should have left Germany to their own devices. We should have left Japan to their own device. Japan, I'll give you that one. All right. One successful example out of like 20. Nonetheless, we do have other things to talk about here today. I want to talk about censorship. I want to talk about the Pope. But first, we have to get to The Essence of Evil by the anti-media. Sex with children has become big business in America. You heard that correctly. Sex with children has become big business in America. Now, if that does not leave you wanting to vomit, then you should probably consider either severe psychological help, prison time, or maybe even suicide. Seppuku is completely endorsed if you don't have a problem with this article. Not the article itself, but the subject matter of the article, right? We have quite a big problem in this country with child sex trafficking. And it needs to be addressed because it's disgusting. It's not just disgusting. It's one of those things where, like, this is easily one of the most evil aspects of organized crime ever. Okay, you can say everything you want about gambling and about selling guns and, selling heroin and things like that. This is horrible. Disgusting, deplorable. The people committing these acts are lower than everything on the totem pole you can imagine. Forget dogs, forget the lizards, forget the pigs, okay? They're lower than the bacteria on my feces, all right? And this is a problem that we have in this country, not in other countries, although it does exist in the West, in other countries, but in this country. Anti-Media by John Whitehead. The Essence of Evil. Sex with children has become big business in America. Children, young girls, some as young as 9 years old, are being bought and sold for sex in America. The average age for a young woman being sold for sex is now 13 years old. Let me point out something real quick. That is before puberty is finished. This is pedophilia. Okay? This is pedophilia. On average, it's pedophilia. Not on average, it's sex with teenagers. Not on average, it's sex with young women who are, 18, 19, 20 years old. No, on average, it's pedophiles. Now, all of it is disgusting, but the fact that on average, these people would like to go have sex with children is disgusting. And this is, again, the United States of America. It's America's dirty little secret, says the anti-media. Sex trafficking, especially when it comes to the buying and selling of young girls, has become big business in America and is the fastest growing business in organized crime and the second most lucrative commodity traded illegally after drugs and guns. That would actually make it third, but that's okay. Whatever. As investigative journalist Amy Fine Collins notes, quote, it's become more lucrative and much safer to sell malleable teens than drugs or guns. A pound of heroin or an AK-47 can be retailed once, but a young girl can be sold 10 to 15 times a day. And a, quote, righteous pimp confiscated 100% of her earnings, end quote. Earnings. I don't think you should call it earnings. I mean, we shouldn't try and pretend that this is stuff that it's okay, right? Please ignore the ad. I'm sorry. There's unfortunately ads on the news, and they happen to be for underwear. I apologize. Consider this. Every 2 minutes, a child is exploited in the sex industry. According to USA Today, adults purchase children for sex at least 2.5 million times a year in the United States. 2.5 million times in this country. Not in a different country. This isn't across the pond. This isn't in the Middle East. It's not in China or India. It's in the United States of America. Who buys a child for sex? Otherwise, ordinary men from all walks of life. This could be your coworker, doctor, pastor, or spouse, writes journalist Tim Swarens, who spent more than a year investigating the sex trade in America. In Georgia alone, it is estimated that 7,200 men, half of them in their 30s, seek to purchase sex with adolescent girls each month. Roughly 300 a day. Each month! 300 a day! On average, a child might be raped by 6,000 men during a 5-year period of servitude. It is estimated that at least 100,000 children, girls and boys, are bought and sold for sex in the United States every year, with as many as 300,000 children in danger of being trafficked each year. Some of these children are forcefully abducted, others are runaways, and still others are sold into the system by relatives and acquaintances. Quote, human trafficking, the commercial sexual exploitation of American children and women via the internet, strip clubs, escort services, or street prostitution is on its way to becoming one of the world's worst crimes in the United States, or one of the worst crimes in the United States. I don't know why I said the world, sorry. End quote. Says prosecutor Krishna Patel. Somber subjects, friends, I'm sorry. It's disgusting. This is an industry that revolves around cheap sex on the fly with young girls and women who are sold to 50 men each day for $25 apiece, while their handlers make $150,000 to $200,000 per child each year. By the way, if you find these articles, you'll notice there's all these links here. Click on them, read them. They are legitimate links, I can assure you. This is not, excuse me, a little too far. This is not a problem found only in big cities. It's happening everywhere, right under our noses, in suburbs, cities, and towns across the nation. As Ernie Allen of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children points out, the only way not to find this in any American city is simply not to look for it. Don't fool yourselves into believing that this is merely a concern for lower-income communities or immigrants. It's not. It is estimated that there are 100,000 to 150,000 underage child sex workers in the U.S. These girls aren't volunteering to be sex slaves. They're being lured, forced, and trafficked into it. In most cases, they have no choice. Now, just for the record, I can say, having grown up in Reno, Nevada, that there is definitely some who do choose this. It is certainly a rarity. Certainly. But I just want to point that out for the record. And for the record, those aren't the 12 and 13-year-old girls, too. Let's point something out. These are 16 and 17-year-old girls who are doing it willingly. Okay? And even then, it's still a rarity. And even then, it's still deplorable because prostitution and objectifying women like this is disgusting. It's horrible. It's one of the worst aspects of the sexual revolution and of the amorality that has just become so pervasive in this country. But I just want to point that out, just for the record. Right? We do have to be able to distinguish between these things. In order to avoid detection, in some cases aided and abetted by the police, Indeed. And cater to male buyers' demand for sex with different women. Pimps and the gangs and crime syndicates they work for have turned sex trafficking into a highly mobile enterprise, with trafficked girls, boys, and women constantly being moved from city to city, state to state, and country to country. For instance, the Baltimore-Washington area, referred to as the Circuit, with its I-95 corridor dotted with rest stops, bus stations, and truck stops, is a hub for the sex trade. No doubt about it, this is highly profitable, highly organized, and highly sophisticated sex trafficking business that operates in towns large and small, ranking upwards of $9.5 billion in the United States alone by abducting and selling young girls for sex. That's a heartbreaking number. You know what I mean? That there's that much people actually paying to exploit children. And quite frankly, let me point out, these syndicates, there should be no mercy whatsoever. We find them, we should kill them, right? We should find them guilty, of course, okay? Trials for everyone. Warrants before you search. I am a constitutionalist through and through, and you need to be found guilty beyond any shadow of a doubt. But once you are, there is absolutely no reason why we should not take your life for this. Absolutely none. There are 4 things that I think the death penalty should be used for: torture, pedophilia, violent rape, and and murder. Specifically, murder that is not crime of passion murder or things like that, right? But I don't know, how would you put that? I guess murder that is, there's a word for it. Unprovoked, right? Nonetheless. Every year, the girls being bought and sold gets younger and younger. The average age of those being trafficked is 13, yet the head of a group that combats trafficking pointed out, let's think about what the average means. That means there are children younger than 13. That means 8, 9, 10-year-olds. For every 10 women rescued, there are 50 to 100 more women who are brought in by the traffickers. Who aren't brought in by the traffickers, I think. No. Sorry, for every 10 women rescued, there are 50 to 100 more women who are brought in by the traffickers. Unfortunately, they are not 18 to 20 years old anymore, noted a 25-year-old victim of trafficking. They're minors as young as 13 who are being trafficked. They're little girls. End quote. Where did this appetite for young girls come from? Look around you. Young girls have been sexualized for years. Thank you, anti-media, for pointing this out. For years, in music videos, on billboards, in television ads, and in clothing stores, marketers have created a demand for young flesh and a ready supply for over-sexualized children. Look at Billie Eilish and Bad Baby if you do not believe this. Okay? They have created a demand for over-sexualized women, period. Period. And this has not been, by the way, some deplorable patriarchy or something like that. This has been the sexual liberation movement from the progressives and the feminists and the atheist humanists and all those people. These are the ones who said we should be able to have sex with whoever we want. These are the ones who said you shouldn't be shaming people for being whores. These are the ones who said we should be able to show our flesh on music videos and movies. These are the ones who said that we should be able to put pornography out for the masses rather than just in its own private area. It was these people who normalized sex. These progressives. Okay? Thank you, anti-media, for pointing out the United States of America has a really big problem with this. It is a huge problem with this, okay? I cannot go practically anywhere in the United States of America without seeing constantly women in promiscuous clothing, women who are giving themselves out for nothing, women who are showing themselves off on television or on Instagram or on billboards for practically nothing, just giving this stuff away because they don't value themselves as people anymore. Okay? This is our country, the United States of America. This is a relatively old quote. As like I said, you can go and click all the links on this. You can actually already notice that, though, when you see the, right, MySpace. Dated! All it takes is one look at MySpace photos of teens to see examples. If they aren't imitating porn, they are actually seen. They're imitating the porn-inspired images and poses they've absorbed elsewhere, writes Jessica Bennett for Newsweek. Latex corsets and stripper heels, once the fashion of porn stars, have been made their way into middle and high schools. Exactly. Exactly. Thank you. When people say, oh, the dress code thing is sexist, no, it is not. It is for the preservation of women's own self-esteem. You should not be degrading yourself, showing off your butt, showing off your breasts, showing off everything else for other people, giving it away for other people constantly for no reason. It's not good for you. It's unhealthy. And it's not good for the men either, because there's a lot of men who unfortunately don't have a very strong moral conscience, and unfortunately will start buying in to the sexual objectification of women. This is a fact. Okay, it starts here. This is what Bennett refers to as the pornification of a generation. In a market that sells high heels for babies and thongs for tweens, it doesn't take a genius to see that sex, if not porn, has invaded our lives, end quote, concludes Bennett. Quote, whether we welcome it or not, television brings into our living rooms and the web pages in our bedroom, brings it into our living rooms and the web pages in our bedroom. According to a 2007 study from the University of Alberta, as many as 90% of boys and 70% of girls aged 13 to 14 have accessed sexually explicit content at least once, end quote. 13 and 14 years old. In other words, the culture is grooming these young people to be preyed upon by sexual predators. And then we wonder why our young women are being preyed on, trafficked, and abused. And that's the worst example of it. There's the other examples that I'm talking about here too, like women passing it out for nothing and degrading themselves. Okay, you have other people going out of their way to degrade women. You have women degrading themselves, and it's starting with the way we consume media. Now, I'm not saying we should regulate media. I'm not saying we should regulate any of these sorts of things. What I am saying, however, there is a culture problem, a moral problem in this country when we do not see women as anything but sexual objects. When the ideas of women's liberation involves sex at 15 with multiple men plus women wearing booty shorts, going out to be a porn star, and then eventually ending up right here, right? This is a problem. We need to solve this problem. Like now. Right now. Because it is going to continuously get worse. Okay? As time goes on. In fact, you know, this article, like I said, it's a little bit dated. I mean, how bad is it? I mean, look at Bad Baby and Billie Eilish, right? Billie Eilish was 15 years old talking about might seduce your dad. Okay? Now, I personally do happen to think that 15 and 16-year-old girls are perfectly capable of knowing what they're getting into when they start having sex with people. We should hold them accountable for their own actions when they do things like this, right? Not when they're forced into it, of course. However, what kind of message is that going to be passing off to young girls? 15, 16, 17 years old, right? Because let me be perfectly clear, if you're 15, 16, 17 years old, you shouldn't be going around having sex. In fact, you shouldn't be going around having sex with a bunch of people regardless. You should be having sex with people who you are in love with, particularly people who are the first person you've had sex with. Hopefully you are married to them, right? We have a tried and true formula for this. It goes on to say social media makes it all too easy, right? Look at MySpace, Facebook, and other social networks. Parents, this is all I got to say. Parents, control your children. Children, value yourselves. You are not valued by how many men and or women you've slept with. You are not valued by how sexually attractive you look. You're not valued by how bad you are, by how many drugs you've taken or how much of those particular kinds of drugs you can take, by how long your rap sheet is. I remember being 15 years old, bragging to my friends that I had been in juvie for longer than any of them. You know what that is? Retarded. That's what that is. Okay? I was retarded. And a lot of us are when we're that age. Don't do it. It is horrible. And this is where it leads. Okay? Mass sexual exploitation. Because it's objectification first, then it goes to exploitation. And also, by the way, if you hear anything about sexual trafficking, report it to the police, please. Like, as soon as you can. Do something about this. Don't just let your young girls be abused by thugs, by dogs. Do not let this happen, okay? Call the police. Reach out to women who you think are being abused, okay? Don't just sit by and let them be degraded like this, because they are your daughters, they are your mothers, they are your sisters, they are your wives, okay? And by the way, if you have any sort of balls at all as a man, you need to defend them. Man, we're already at 55 minutes. There was a lot of other stuff I wanted to talk about. Might just end up going a little bit over time. Conservative critics call on bishops to censor Pope Francis for heresy. Now this is interesting. Crux now, Charles Collins. I don't really know how you can censor a pope for... I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of loophole in Catholic doctrine I'm not aware of. But nonetheless, a new open letter the conservative critics of Pope Francis have accused the pontiff of committing... from conservative critics of Pope Francis, rather, has accused the pontiff of committing heresy and called on the world's bishops to censor him and, if necessary, declare that he is no longer pope. The 19 signatories of the letter are mostly associated with the traditionalist movement and previously signed the 2017 Filial Correction, initially signed by 62 theologians and clergy. The most prominent name on the document is Dominican Father Aidan Nichols, the Cambridge-based theologian who is known for his work on theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar's, or theologian Hans, just Balthasar, sorry. Nicholas has not signed the 2017 document. Nichols, I keep calling him Nicholas. Most of the criticism in the open letter deal with the cautious opening to offering communion to the divorced and remarried in Amoris Laetitia, the Pope's 2016 document on marriage and family life. To back their claims, the letter also lists people the Pope has appointed to various posts. The signatories accuse of holding heretical positions and various actions and statements by the Pope that the authors state offer other... let me just read it out. To back their claims, the letter also lists people the Pope has appointed to various posts, and the signatories accused of holding heretical positions, and various actions and statements by the Pope that the authors state offer other indications of the Pope's heresy. These include failing to speak against the Irish referendum on abortion in 2018, allowing the Chinese government to appoint bishops using a staff that authors claim was satanic at the opening, Mass at the 2018 Youth Synod, and using a rainbow-colored cross at the World Youth Day in Panama. All things that I, as a non-Catholic Christian, would actually agree with, too. But we'll get to that. The staff used at the Synod was an artistic representation of Christ on the cross presented to the Pope at a youth event in Rome, and although the rainbow colors were associated with the LGBT movement, a rainbow flag is also used to represent peace in many parts of the world, especially Italy. The signatories called on the bishop of the world to urgently address the situation of Pope Francis' public adherence to heresy, end quote, and publicly admonish the pontiff to, quote, abjure the heresies he has professed, end quote. Quote, if, which God forbid, Pope Francis does not bear the fruit of true repentance in response to the admonitions, we request that you carry out your duty of office to declare that he has committed the canonical delicit of heresy, and he must suffer the canonical consequences of this crime, end quote, the letter reads. Later clarifying that it is, quote, is agreed that a pope who is guilty of heresy and remains obstinate in his heretical view cannot continue as pope, end quote. The authors also say that such declaration does not need to be taken by all the bishops of the Catholic Church, quote, or even by a majority of them, end quote, but only a substantial and representative part of the faithful bishops. Quote, given the open, comprehensive, and devastating nature of the heresy of Pope Francis, willingness publicly to admonish Pope Francis for heresy appears now to be a necessary condition for being a faithful bishop of the Catholic Church, end quote, the letter said. The publication of Amoris Laetitia led to 4 cardinals, Italian Carlo Caffarra, American Raymond Burke, and Germans Walter Brandmüller and Joachim Meisner, to ask Francis for clarification on the issue. When no response was given, the cardinals made their 5 questions called dubia public. Burke said that if this pope fails to clarify his position, a formal fraternal correction would be presented by the cardinals, although no such correction has yet been issued. 2 of them, Meisner and Caffarra, have since died. What does this mean? Well, what this means is basically that we are going to see a split in the Catholic Church, more than likely. Is that good? No, actually, it is probably not. Why do I say that? Well, because, to be honest with you, I don't trust traditionalist Catholics any more than I trust the nominal liberal Catholics, because traditionalist Catholics still hold to a evil ideology, namely Roman Catholicism. Okay? Traditionalist Catholics affirm, which, in irony of irony, I know, affirm the infallibility of the Pope, which is what is getting us into this problem in the first place. Okay? So if they end up taking control, I don't trust that they are going to lead this organization any better. Let's remember Pope Benedict XVI is currently considered the figurehead of the traditionalists, and he had a whole lot of sexual abuse happen under his reign. And he had a whole lot of problems in his past. For example, the fact that he is a member of Hitler Youth. I cannot stress that enough, right? So I don't trust them, but also, if they lose, this is a perfect place for the Grand Blasphemous Francis to use his power, to use his, quote, infallibility, to use his, quote, position as Vicar of Christ, which the Roman Catholic Church gives him, bestows upon him, which is false. He can now use that position to weed out Catholics who will not agree with his position and start a purge of traditionalist Catholics, which may or may not start a purge of other areas where he is starting to, throw his religious stick around. For example, in the World Council of Churches, right? Pope Francis is a speak softly, carry a big stick kind of guy, except he really, really likes to use that stick. World Council of Churches, World Alliance of Religions for Peace. We go on it constantly, right? Shimon Peres asking him to have a United Nations of Religions. So this situation is bad, okay? It is all bad. The only possible way this is positive is if Pope Francis gets taken out, there's a schism in the church, some new pope leads the Catholic Church to do the things the Catholic Church are going to do, and the people who leave the Catholic Church recognize the Catholic Church is in fact heretical from its very inception, okay? And like a second Protestant Reformation occurs. That is the only positive way something like this happens, and I highly doubt that'll happen considering the governmental influence that Pope Francis has with China, with the United Nations, with NATO, with the European Union, with Argentina, etc. Right? Don't really have too much time. I expected to get to this a lot sooner, but a teen girl was coerced into sex and held in a dog cage. Her captor will serve no prison time. It's from the Washington Post. You can read this article for yourself. Again, a teen girl was coerced into sex and held into a dog cage. Her captor will serve no prison time. This is written by Michael Wysolowski. No, Michael Wysolowski is the person, is the criminal. Sorry. This is written by Antonia Noura Farzan. This is a horrible article, but this is something I wanted to point out because we were pointing out the sex trafficking that is currently going on, right? The anti-media article. Read this. You definitely should read this article. I'm not a big fan of the Washington Post, but this is something that needs to be talked about. This young girl has been horribly abused by this pig, by this literal less than pig manure, right? And he will not serve any jail time at all. And that is disgusting. Okay? And we need to do something about the inability to put rapists behind bars. Okay? We really do. Because it is beyond problematic in this country. And again, like I said, I'm not going to get too much into it because I have one other point I want to get into. We're already over time, and I have talked about the sexual trafficking, sexual objectification. But I note this because you guys need to know this is a big problem. This is our daughters we're talking about. This is our sisters we're talking about. Okay? And they are under constant threat. And it's not in the ways that the feminists try to point out with like, oh, rape culture and things like that. It's not in the ways that people even on the right are pointing out when they say, like, Islam, right? That Islam's a big problem in Europe. We're not in Europe. Okay, it's from the sexual objectification we ourselves do to our daughters, and it is from crimes which are occurring right under our nose that nobody is doing anything about. Pedophilia, sex trafficking, rape. Okay? And we need to go after these people. Okay? That is the only way that you will ever solve this problem, and it can never be completely solved. Humans are just evil. But you can crack down on it, something fierce. The Independent Facebook bans Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, Louis Farrakhan, and other right-wing personalities. Now, right off the bat, you need to know you cannot trust The Independent because Louis Farrakhan is not a right-wing personality. He is a left-wing personality. In fact, he's a Muslim. Milo Yiannopoulos and Louis Farrakhan would disagree on pretty much everything. Alex Jones has done an interview with Louis Farrakhan before, but I'm not sure they would agree on too much. This is Chris Ryota, Facebook has banned popular right-wing personalities citing their content as dangerous while announcing a major purge from its platform. Bans have been issued to conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, fringe right-wing social media personalities Laura Loomer and Milo Yiannopoulos, who often exposes xenophobic and anti-immigrant sentiments, among several others. Fringe right social media. I mean, you just the amount of loaded statement in these posts is just ridiculous. Quote, we've always banned individuals or organizations that promote or engage in violence and hate regardless of ideology, end quote. The company said in a statement announcing the bans, quote, the process of evaluating potential violators is extensive, and it is what led us to our decision to remove the accounts today, end quote. Other accounts purged Thursday. Thursday were operated by Louis Farrakhan, a leader of the Nation of Islam, who has made several anti-Semitic statements, along with reported anti-Semites like Paul Nehlen, who launched unsuccessful congressional campaigns in the last 2 elections. Ms. Loomer and several others included in the Facebook ban have also been removed from other social media sites like Twitter. Mr. Jones, who runs a conspiracy theory outlet called InfoWars, had several of his affiliated accounts shut down on the platform in October last year, a month after he and the outlet were permanently, his outlet being, InfoWars, he and the outlet were banned for violating behavior policies. A spokesperson for Facebook and CNN Business, certainly not news business, the accounts purged Thursday were deemed dangerous after being evaluated in a lengthy process that includes assessing whether the person or organization has ever called for violence against individuals based on race, ethnicity, or national origin, whether the person has been identified with a hateful ideology, or whether they have used hate speech or slurs in their about section on their social media platforms, or profiles rather, and whether they have pages or groups removed from Facebook for violating hate speech rules, end quote. Ms. Loomer, whose account on Instagram, another platform owned by Facebook, remained active shortly after the ban against her was announced, urged her fans to follow her on Telegram. Quote, Instagram is going to ban me in minutes, she wrote. They want me dead. They don't want me to exist. Soon I'll be gone forever, end quote. Within minutes, her accounts no longer appeared on the platform. Many other accounts were also remaining across Facebook's platform at press time, suggesting multiple news outlets had agreed to an embargo on the announcement revealing the bans. Mr. Yiannopoulos also reportedly posted on his Instagram before it was removed. According to reports, users are still allowed to share information pertaining to the banned accounts except for InfoWars and events meant to promote the banned figures. Accounts that continue to share information from InfoWars will face potential bans, The Atlantic reported, and all InfoWars content will be removed from Facebook platforms. Remember when we said first they came for Alex Jones? Now it's all of InfoWars. And Milo Yiannopoulos, and even Louis Farrakhan. They're even going after people on the left. We told you. And this is only going to get worse. Okay? And the social media platforms and the news organizations and all these other groups, they agree 100% with this. Okay? Recently, Donald Trump Jr. has urged conservatives to fight back against tech censorship. How long before they come to purge you, he says. And he's exactly correct. Okay, he is exactly correct. I urge you to read this article at InfoWars. I know they say, oh, you just can't go and endorse anything from InfoWars. Well, I'm going to, precisely because you told me not to. So, go to hell and slit your wrists vertically. Donald Trump Jr., the outspoken eldest son of the president, is calling on people to come together to fight back against big tech censorship. Go ahead and check out this article here from InfoWars. It is written by, I believe, doesn't actually say, but great article to be reading. And we need to fight back against the censorship, right? Not by regulation, preferably. Paul Joseph Watson and Alex Jones have called for regulation for these companies. I would not like that. Facebook is begging for regulation precisely because they know it would benefit them in their purge of conservatives and Christians and things like that. Content they deem controversial. Just look at European Union for an example of that. I would like to see us form our own new YouTubes. I would like to take this moment to say, get on Gab. Okay, even if you don't use Twitter, just get on Gab for the sole purpose of having a Gab. Okay, running out of time here on Facebook, really are. So, to get a new Facebook, get a new YouTube, get a new Twitter. Already have a new Twitter. Get on Gab. Thank you guys very much for watching this episode of the Watchdog. You can, of course, like and share if you enjoyed our content, and subscribe here to the TheCynicogue, or like us on the American Cynic Party page, depending on if you watch this on the TheCynicogue YouTube or American Cynic Party on Facebook. Leave any questions, comments, criticisms, or critiques in the comment sections below. We can provide links to articles and all that kind of stuff in said comment sections. Also, we would just like to point out we have a Gab account, C.J. Cox at ACP Official. We have a Minds account, TheCynicogue. We have a Instagram account, Cynic Thought. We have, I think that's it actually. Nope, a Twitter account, Terrestrial Earthbird, parentheses, TheCynicogue. So you can follow us on any of those platforms there. This is where we're at in history. So just make sure that you stay vigilant. Make sure that you stay rebellious. Speak out, right? There's absolutely no reason whatsoever for you to kowtow to the whims of Silicon Valley and big tech and the liberal communist regime that is trying to be established here in this nation. Shalom. You guys have a phenomenal rest of your evening.